California Supreme Court Justice, take on this responsibility?
Yes, in part, but also let me say every day is a learning day for me. I read all of the blogs and the reports and the fact sheets and everything that comes out before the public gets it. And I'm always learning something, and I'm always in awe of the researchers here and the teams here and what they do, and they do so well.
Yeah, you have some really fantastic people there. What about the issue of being, in an interconnected, digitized world, where misinformation is spread sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally? How do you think that the PPIC can break through that, Din, and on these important public issues, get this kind of nonpartisan, unbiased problem-solving approach in front of the public?
We are in the process of refining and expanding our platforms for communication. So like all, we have, of course, reached out with Twitter and Instagram, and we do blogs, and we're contemplating other means of digestible information for people and reaching different audiences, emerging leaders, K through 12, young people, local leaders, legislators who will be retiring in the next year or 2 years, who will go into public policy or consulting. And we're trying to do that with how people receive information. Right. So deep researchers and policy people will read our reports, but for every report that we publish, we have what's called a summary, but we call it a policy brief. And it is a summary of what we just said. Also, we blog about it, and our researchers get on video and talk about the high points and take Q&A. So we're trying to put ourselves out there in every way accessible that you can have a 30-second shot at a PPIC piece of information or a 300-minute read of a PPIC information. But we're trying to make that available to the public. And also I'm trying to share what our reading lists are. I always ask people, what do you read? And in what order do you read it? And I tell people PPIC should be at the top because it's the facts. Thereafter, you can read all the opinions you want, but you should start with the facts.
Yeah, it's people consume information differently, and I'm trying to catch up. My daughter who's 17 always sometimes makes a reference of oh, Dad, you're such a boomer. It's not meant as a compliment. So I'm trying to keep up. So I ask her, so how do people get information? How do your friends get information these days? So that is also very helpful. One of the things, we of course have the TV show and the radio show for the Maddy Institute, but we also have an e-newsletter, an e-news aggregator called the Maddy Daily, which I hope all of the audience here gets. One of the things we do on a regular basis with the Maddy Daily is when we see a PPIC study, it's in the Maddy Daily. So one of the places, if you're somehow not checking the PPIC website, just check the Maddy Daily every day. If there's a PPIC report, it's going to be in the daily, because I think you guys have that reputation. You're trying to reach a larger audience. There are those of us that are the policy wonks that are going to get into this anyway, but then there are other folks that are kind of, the average citizen's pretty busy, kind of wants to be informed, but there's always 16 other things on their to-do list. How do you reach out to them?
I think a lot of it has to do with you get it when you get it. And it may not be immediately, but I think that because PPIC covers such a range of issues that affect people who live here, education, families, the economy, the criminal justice system, the safety network, public service, because many of our renowned researchers are economists and demographers, we provide things that are just interesting fact sheets, like who's moving out of California, who's moving in, things like the declining birth rates, just information about your state that I realize we all have lots of things on our minds and many, many activities and tasks, but this informs our life, and we want to get information for people to make decisions. So we're going to keep putting information out there, and we're going to continue to make it relevant to Californians. We're hope to launch soon an economic opportunity center. And that's where PPIC will have a center that brings together business and workers to find a place where we can have a conversation to make California work for both. The governor recently said California is the 4th largest economy in the world. We just surpassed Germany. But in order for that to maintain in the future, we need to have a place where business and workers can talk about their differences so policymakers can make law that satisfies both. So PPIC is moving in that direction. We're also going to fulfill our Understanding California's Future chair, because we have a subject matter to look at trends so that your 17-year-old daughter could read it and know what California will look like 10 years from now for her.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You guys are obviously in the private sector space, a nonprofit, you know, kind of considered the preeminent think tank. But you know, there are also some very good ones in the public sector. You know, you've got the Legislative Analyst's Office, does primarily budget stuff, but they do other things as well. You have the state auditor, the Little Hoover Commission. So here's my question: why a private sector think tank? Are these issues already being covered with these public sector agencies or organizations, or is there something unique that the PPIC brings to the table?
Those are excellent think tanks, but they all have one thing in common, and that is that they are primarily state funded and they have obligations under state statute. The PPIC organization, as you indicated, we are private, nonprofit, charitable, and we are independent. So we are donor driven. But we're not just any donor driven. We maintain our independence in terms of we write to the facts and we pick our subjects as relevant to policy. And none of our duties and what we pursue is written in statute and funded by government. We pursue those issues that are cutting edge in the moment, anticipating the moment for California. And our independence is very important to us because we're also, we are fiercely protective of the fact that we are nonpartisan. Our board of directors for PPIC is Democrats and Republicans. And we make an effort that our information is trustworthy and usable for both parties because it's the facts. So I think it makes us different just in terms of the independence. No one controls what we say or do or gets approval, authority over what we write, and we hew to the facts and the circumstances of the data.
Yeah, I think people frankly are yearning for that. I think most people are, you know, toward even the 10 yards of the 50-yard line, right? A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Most of us agree on many things, and they're looking for a source of information that they can trust and rely on. And, you know, the kind of the bipartisan approach, which was something that Ken Maddy was known for, working across the aisle to find solutions to problems. We had a talk a little while, about a year or so ago, where Willie Brown, the former speaker, was the keynote, and he was talking about Ken Maddy. And one of the things he mentioned was the difference between being a politician and a legislator. And he said, basically, as a politician, you're there to, you know, run for office. He said, but once you're elected, you become a legislator. And what you're supposed to be doing is thinking about what are the best policies for your constituents and for the state. And he said, Ken Maddy exemplified that. And that's one of the things one of the things we promote is that Maddy approach of working across the aisle, basing it on facts, being respectful, being someone you can trust. Some of the things, frankly, that's too often lost in politics today. We're doing our best to try to bring that back. Let me ask you, let me transition a little bit and talk about your experience on the court. 12 years as the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. I'm just wondering, how is that going to influence your work and your role at PPIC?
Well, I think it's good training, and I never thought anything could be similar to my role as the Chief Justice of California. So putting aside size and working with over 2,000 constitutional officers, because all judges in California are elected, and I'm certainly not their boss, but I am their administrator, and working with 6 other Supreme Court justices on the California Supreme Court, all of whom are brilliant, dedicated people appointed by different governors, having different points of view, coming from different walks of life. The difference, I think, is that in my public position as Chief Justice and with all of my colleagues, every one of us strive for the facts first. Let's get the facts right. Let's report these facts neutrally in an opinion. So if you read any Supreme Court case, we take, of course, our facts from how the jury found them. But you can also, in writing those facts, you can write them a certain way, and you can almost tell from how the facts are written from some cases, how the case is going to turn out. But at the California Supreme Court, we write the facts neutrally. We don't put our thumb on the scale for sympathy or for favor. We are very clear about only writing the facts, and that's what we start with. And then the opinion moves on to what is the policy or what is the law? And then we analyze it. So I think in the last 12 years for me on the court, as the Chief Justice, but even the 20 years before that as a judge on the trial court and the appellate court, I only start from the facts. I love people's opinions. I'm happy to hear them after the facts. And PPIC is about the facts and the data, and then moves on from there as how it informs policy. So, the thoughtfulness, the deliberation, the fairness, the integrity of who we're writing for and our role is the same in many ways. I see a consonance between being on the Supreme Court and being here at PPIC.
Yeah, I can see that from how you describe writing out the facts in a court decision. Let me ask you this, though. You're also the second woman and first person of color to be California's Chief Justice. I wonder how much your identity experience has shaped your outlook on public policy.
I think, honestly, quite a bit. Of course, when I was the Chief Justice, or even when I was a trial court and appellate court jurist, my personal experience might have affected my extracurricular and what issues and initiatives I sought to proceed and what I joined. But in terms of the work itself, we stick to the law and we interpret the law as the facts from which the jury found. So it's a very, very confining kind of analysis. But of course, I've lived my life in this state like you have, and I've seen it change, and I've been a part of that change. And my relatives and my friends and my professional colleagues we've all shared opinions. So certainly being a woman and a person of color affects my lens, what I see and how much of it I see, and how I listen. I think because my parents were farm workers and they didn't finish college or never got to college. My mom went to community college when she was 50. I just have a viewpoint of, I don't see barriers. I see let's overcome barriers. Let's overcome artificiality, and let's get to the root and the solution and try to make things easier for people. And I think that's what I see in California. So I have a lot of questions and curiosity as to why things exist and do we really need them?
Yeah. One of the things that another Senator Maddy kind of approach was that one of the things he said was never look at your, quote unquote, your opponent, person you're on the other side of an issue with, as a bad person. Just they've got a different perspective because of their life experiences. They have a different way. You're both aiming at point B. You just have a different path maybe to get there. And I think if you assume the best in your opponent, not the worst, a lot of times it's a lot easier to reach some kind of compromise. I want to ask you about your work in civic education, which is obviously a hallmark of your time as Chief Justice. How do you plan to continue that work as CEO and president of the PPIC?
Well, I'm very excited because PPIC is dedicated in their strategic plan expressly to broaden their civic engagement and civic education. And really writ large, that's what PPIC does anyway. It is civic engagement, and with our convening and our speaker series and our report outs and our blogs and our videos. But it's also now a component of civic education by bringing groups together to explain why, as you just pointed out, we have different points of view, why we have different approaches. But also I hope to take many of the things I learned about the need for civic education and engagement, not only in K through 12, but also in our communities, because California, as you know, is rich in different communities. And to somehow find a way to bring to them, either in person or by video, by remote treatment, a way to bring them in to listen and to be a part of a discussion about California, and first an understanding of our government, and then how we can wield the levers of government to participate, maybe not for them, but for their children or their community. So I'm looking forward to building out that part of the strategic plan of PPIC.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things you guys do when you think about PPIC. One of the things that people think about is that statewide survey of Californians and its government. I mean, that's something that is constantly cited in whether it's the Fresno Bee or the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, New York Times for that matter. I mean, it's constantly being cited. Why do you think that survey is so important?
Well, I think it's very important because it's trustworthy, it has integrity, it's proven to be accurate and consistent, because Mark Baldessari is a master at ensuring that the best qualities and quality control and all the elements are present. And I've been in the Capitol quite a bit, even in this role as president of PPIC, and every legislator, every constitutional officer asks about that survey. When's the survey? How's it coming out? We'd like a download on the survey. Can Mark come talk to us about the survey? So you're right. The members of the policymakers of California at the state level are reading and watching that survey, and they are acting on the results of that survey.
Right. It's yours and the one coming out of Berkeley really are the two ones that everybody watches. And so
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
people pay attention when this thing comes out. Let me ask you about this. A topic, when you take a look at your surveys, one topic that you at least see a lot, certainly recently, is the whole issue of housing and homelessness. What are some of the key findings that the PPIC has done in that area when it comes to housing and homelessness in California?
Well, we know that the survey just most recently released in early February indicated that of the major issues that Californians are concerned about, it's housing, homelessness, and economic and the economy. And as a result of that finding, we learned that many Californians feel that the problem has gotten worse in their community, at least for homelessness, and or as to housing, feel that the costs are otherwise so high that they fear that their family members will not be able to purchase a home in California. So families are concerned that they will be divided. Families are concerned that members will move out. And we have seen numbers and we're hearing from members in the legislature that there is a movement out of California. We're also analyzing who's moving out and who's moving in. And we have some fact sheets on the populations that are moving out and the populations that are moving in. So we are looking at that. We don't necessarily study housing and homelessness single subject, but we study a lot of matters around those, including the safety net, California's programs that help public aid, that help people get back on their feet. We are also studying education and learning loss and how we can speak to policymakers about good programs and data that people can get back on their feet and get back in track for education to build for a future that can ensure economic stability to avoid homelessness. So we help in that way to try to provide them the solutions to the long-term problems of housing and homeless, because housing issues, at least affordability in California and our build-out rate, as you know, has been plagued California for decades. This is not a COVID new issue. The Supreme Court, we have written about the shortage of housing in California, maybe for years, a decade plus more. And then the homelessness issue has been exacerbated. And we at PPIC are looking at all the programs and the financing, the safety nets during COVID and whether they worked and what we can do to ensure that we can provide services in California for this vulnerable population.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the poverty rates in California, what's driving that is the housing costs. And
Right.
Governor Newsom, when he came on board, he said, "Listen, we need a Marshall Plan for housing." And what he was talking about building 500,000 houses a year. We're building about 100,000, so we're building 20% of that target. And so the reality is, it has to ramp up. And I remember reading a while ago, it was an LAO report. This might have been 5-10 years ago, about how much can the state spend its way basically out of fixing this problem? The bottom line answer is no. There isn't enough money in state government to fix the housing problem. They talked about you had to have, private sector's got to be involved in making this happen, increasing the supply of housing. This is not a government only fix. It's going to have to be a kind of a partnership, a public-private partnership. And we could maybe even touch CEQA. I'll leave CEQA alone. I'm not even going to get into CEQA. I'll leave that off to the side. But let's just say there's lots of issues that need to be discussed. Let me ask you another question that's kind of important, certainly important for here in the Valley, and that's water. Critical issue. You guys have got something called the Water Policy Center. Ellen Hannock has been in charge of that for some time. I believe she's just stepping down from that in the near future, done a fantastic job. Just maybe you could tell our audience, what are you trying to accomplish with the Water Policy Center?
Well, the Water Policy Center, it is, as you pointed out, one of our premier programs, and Ellen, she created it. And even though she's stepping away as the center director, she's still with us. She will be a senior fellow.
You don't let people go, do you? You never let people go.
No, I don't think they want to go, but we're happy that they're agreeing to stay. No, we're thrilled that they stay. So the Water Policy Center is a center that brings together very different voices about water. Now, water can be an explosive issue. There are strong feelings about water and its use and its distribution and water rights, not only in California, but as we've seen our disagreements over the Colorado River and other states. But California, it's no understatement to say water is gold. I mean, you don't want to talk about CEQA, and neither do I, but we also know that water is a big issue, its supply for CEQA. You just talked about housing, and we know that CEQA, water, climate, a number of factors have everything to do and go into the understanding of a housing development. So the Water Policy Center manages miraculously to bring many voices, all the concerns about water together in one room in a water advisory council, and to talk about all of our needs. It is a big tent discussions in order to write and to suggest and to talk about solutions together. We bring together experts and voices. And when you bring, as you pointed out earlier, different points of view, we learn from each other. No one is wholly right in the water discussion, and no one is wholly wrong, but we all know we need it. And we need to, as you said, we need the Ken Maddy approach. We need to work across the aisles to share our water and make it happen. And the Water Policy Center informs, people listen, the water policy leaders in the Capitol and statewide listen and read, and other organizations pay attention. So it is a gathering place for us to bring disparate voices and to work on policy solutions to improve California.
Yeah, it's kind of the concept that no one has a monopoly on good ideas. There's lots of good ideas out there, and if you're open to it, I mean, maybe you can find solutions. And I will say, when I talk to people in ag, they sometimes grouse a little bit about government, but I've heard almost universally praise for the Water Policy Center at the PPIC. I mean, they trust, which is, I think, what you're trying to accomplish, is they trust that as a reliable source of accurate information. And while they may disagree what to do with that information, they at least are starting from the same basis point, which frankly, even today, what you would think that, well, that's normal. Everybody starts from the same set of facts. Actually, no, it's not. That's actually a positive. It's a nice new addition, or at least maybe going back to what we used to do. Before we end up here and open up to Q&A, I wanted to ask you about what other possible policy issues you're focusing on, or you think are going to be focusing on in the future.
We have, as you can imagine, a rich variety of very educated and connected voices in PPIC, with our talented staff, researchers, and our board, and all of our stakeholders. So currently, PPIC and our different units, we're focusing on what projects and reports we will build out for 2023. So we're formulating what we call our annual plans. But part of that is, as I mentioned earlier, the hopeful launch of an economic opportunity center. And that is taking a lot of what PPIC already knows and does, and using that material to understand what economic opportunity means or doesn't mean in California. And we're looking to establish the Economic Opportunity Center like the Water Center. Let's bring voices that typically yell at each other in the Capitol. Let's bring them over to PPIC and have a civil discussion about what are the problems and where can we agree and where will we disagree. Yeah. And so we're hoping to launch that hopefully in the next fiscal year. And we're also doing the Understanding California's Future. And what we're looking there is, we're talking about looking at trends in California that are sometimes overlooked and extending them out and seeing what is the long-term consequence of this trend. But at the same time, I'm thinking about, well, we need to reach local government, elected leaders, school districts and boards, and engage them with our higher education program. We need to look at higher education, and we're putting out an explainer very soon that talks about whether or not a four-year college degree is still worth it, who's getting it, the for-profit colleges, the public colleges, debt, which is a huge part of whether or not you will pursue a four-year college degree. And we're putting out this backgrounder to help set the stage for moving forward and speaking to policymakers about more resources for community colleges, for CSUs, for finding ways to make sure there's a pathway to a UC. So we're working on a lot of dynamic areas, and I'm also looking at what are the major employers of California? What do they need? What are their challenges? What trends are they seeing? Like we're hearing from the legislature some interesting trends about private education. That is, places like Google and Disney that are offering their own education, their own certification programs. So people are skipping college entirely. They're not going to community college. They're not going to any other higher university or any education besides high school, into a business, getting a certification, and that allows them to succeed in the business that they are in. So we're looking at this competitive rise of private education or certification versus the traditional four-year degree.
You know, it's almost what's old is new again. I mean, we used to call those apprenticeship programs, right?
Yeah,
in
that's
the trades, right? But now we're in higher. It's just kind of a transition. But it's interesting, you know, when people are on these topics you're talking about, all very important topics. You know, sometimes voices are raised, and people are very, you know, passionate. Sometimes it's like, whoa, that's too much. I actually look at that as they really care. Now, maybe they need to tone it down a little bit, but it's coming from a good place. They really want to see things improve, whether from the left or from the right. And so if you can just harness that energy and can focus it in solving problems, I think then we get there. You know, thank you so much for your remarks. I want to open it up to Q&A if it's okay with you.
Yes.
We got someone who's asking, do you guys, does the PPIC always research on its own, or do you do work in collaboration with other groups or organizations?
Great question. Yes, we do. We seek out external sources. And when we do write a report, we always have an external process where we have someone outside of PPIC review the report and bring critical edits to it or critical questions to it as well. So we get industry experts. PPIC also has, for example, our Water Policy Center has a Water Advisory Council. Our Higher Education Center has a Higher Education Council. Our Criminal Justice Focus has a Criminal Justice Advisory Committee. So these are various organizations, not all in lockstep, not even echo chambers, who weigh in on what PPIC is studying, researching, and ultimately writing.
You know, because you're also the former California Supreme Court Justice, you're going to get court questions. So here's a question. Someone's asking about is it a good idea to expand the U.S. Supreme Court? You know, this person refers to them as activist judges. You can see that conceivably coming back to hurt liberals in the future? Is it doable? I want to add one more thing to kind of that question. I want to ask you this. The point of having a judge appointed for life or for a long term is that they're supposed to be politically immune, right? Immune from political pressure. What are your thoughts on term limits for Supreme Court justices, where you say, okay, listen, we want you on there, I don't know, 21 years, 24 years, whatever, a long period of time. Here's what I'm thinking, is that one of the things we see today, like with the U.S. Supreme Court, is both parties trying to get the youngest person on the court possible so they stay on the court for as long as possible. I'm not sure that, maybe I'm an ageist here, but I'm not sure that gets you the best legal mind. I would say maybe you want someone who's in their 40s or 50s to go on the court after a number of years of experience and spend their last 20, 25 years judging from the bench. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have varied thoughts. And the first to your caller who asked about expanding the membership, my view is the more you expand, your problems don't go away. They're just more voices on either side. So I'm not sure that expansion is the idea, but I know and understand that the view is that maybe then in any 1 year or a term of a president's term, he can sort of pack the court. But I don't know that that's a good idea either for the institution as a whole, for a third branch of government, and for our constitutional democracy. I think maybe a better answer might be, as you just alluded to, and that is maybe terms. And you can still have a lengthy term, but also still be subject to voter approval. So Supreme Court justices and appellate justices have 12-year terms, and trial court judges have 6-year terms. But every state has a different method of selecting their jurists, and every state has different terms, and some are very political. Some judges run as Dems, some run as Reaps. The United States Supreme Court, as you know, federal court, all federal court judges are lifetime appointments. So once you're on, you're generally not off except for impeachment, felony, death, or something else. So you have to ask yourself, what is the best way to pick jurists who can serve with integrity and acumen and still remain loyal to the rule of law? And it's a hard choice to make. But I will say, many of us have talked about a long term called one and done. So maybe you do appoint a jurist, but maybe it's 12 to 15 years, and then you're done. As you know, some states have what they call constitutional senility. So when you turn 70, you can no longer serve as a judge in that state. We don't care what kind of shape you're in. 70 is retirement.
Hey, I'm teasing that line now. So wait a second. But I do like the idea of the one and done concept, where the person is immune from political pressure, but they're old. They've had enough wisdom and they've seen enough that they can bring that experience to bear in their decisions. I think that's something that's worth taking a look at. So, someone's asking about your joint task force on this with the state superintendent of education who approved K-12 civic education, led to the creation of the Civic Learning Partnership in Fresno County and the creation of a nonprofit called the Civic Education Center here. Both are highly active. What's happening in other counties?
Other counties are not as active as Fresno. A real shout out to Fresno for their work. Some other counties are. It really depends on the leadership of the county, that is the local school districts and the judges, the lawyers, and the concerned and active members of that county. But we highly encourage that, because it is, all politics is local. All ability to understand and appreciate civics is local. Knowing your mayor, knowing your city council, knowing their roles, knowing who's responsible for what. And I think when Fresno has built that, as you just described, you're ensuring an educated democracy for your locality. You are only doing good work for your community, for hopefully wise choices, strong leadership, a respect for the rule of law, and fairness to the extent that we can hope for equality and equity, for justice. That's building a community. That's just as important to me as building infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a very good point. The same person asks, this is Dan Jameson. He's a local retired attorney. Welcome, Dan. How do we get Cal State University to require more civics and history education in high school for admission? That should be a higher emphasis placed on that.
I think it would certainly help, and it would also likely turn out, people who are more willing to enter public service or have a goal for public service. But, we've tried to do more in that space by engaging the superintendent of public instruction. And I've had discussions with the president of the UC, and we have outreach with the community college chancellor and with also Cal State. But I will say that's probably a conversation we need to always have. And in my new role at PPIC, I see the ability to bring those kinds of voices together at the table in order to have that discussion, because again, that's an investment in our democracy, an investment in our future, and one that continues to give. So I appreciate that question, and I'll write it down for purposes of my PPIC Civic Engagement and Education Initiative.
There you go. So another person asks about, what is your organization, what does the PPIC do to hear the voices of those who do not have direct access to what they refer to as the power base?
Well, I would say that we do a lot of things that are publicly accessible and free. So we have a speaker series event that's advertised on our website. And in the speaker series, which is now back in person, we offer a free lunch, typically in Sacramento at the Sheraton Hotel, a full free lunch. All you need is just to sign up. And we bring speakers for that one lunch hour. And then there's a Q&A question thereafter. So this is a free civic event. We had one just in February. We invited on the Senate side, the Democratic leader, of course, the President Pro Tem Atkins, and the Republican leader, Senator Brian Jones. And we had them on a panel. We had about 300 people in the audience at a plated lunch for free, because PPIC has donors who sponsor the speaker series events, people who are interested in nonpartisan objective information, and sign up, get a name tag, sit at a table, meet someone new, have lunch, listen to the speakers, and then you're free to ask questions. We also had approximately 400 to 500 people join us online at that same luncheon. So we have another event coming up, that is March 8th, Women's History Month. We have 4 female legislators who will be on the dais with me, and we have Republican and we have Democrats. Again, it'll be a full-plated lunch. We'll have Q&A and an opportunity for question and answers from the audience in person and also online. And we try to do this every other month if we can, to bring speakers and leaders to the community so you can ask questions directly. And we get ideas at PPIC about how to move forward with research. And our blogs are everything that we do is free. Our blogs, our reports, our tweets. So I hope you go to our website and look at our work and determine whether or not we're one of the organizations you'd like to continue to read and maybe support.
You know, your work is obviously very thorough, but it's also very digestible. I mean, it's stuff that's written in a way that's not too wonky. You can read it and understand it, which is really, really helpful.
Thank you.
Short fact sheets can get you to point B pretty quickly, get you up to speed on topics. You know, Howard Watkins, a lot of retired attorneys on today. We wanted to thank you for your continued public service. And he wants to know, does the California Supreme Court have a formal code of ethics that would require a sitting justice to abstain from voting on a case where that justice's spouse receives substantial income from a party or attorney before the court? What are the rules for ethics when it comes to sitting justices?
Hi, Howard. Thank you for the Christmas card and all the photos.
Yes. Howard is our historian when it comes to photos. I think anything that's happened in Fresno in the last 25 years has been documented by Howard.
Same at the state bar. Howard did his community service by taking pictures and always giving us packages of nuts. So that was very good.
There you go. He's representing the Valley well. Okay.
He is. He certainly is. I miss seeing Howard. So Howard, yes, we all state judges at all levels of court have a code of ethics that requires disqualification. Trial courts and courts at appellate justices as well, and at a certain amount of money. I think it's about $1,500 of donation, and it applies to not only the jurist but the spouse or children of the jurist. And at the Supreme Court, we are subject to the very same code of ethics as a trial judge, except when it comes to recusal, which is your point about whether or not we would abstain or recuse or take ourselves off of a case. Now, my experience has been that that the Supreme Court justices and the appellate justices have been very, very careful about ensuring that they stay off cases where there is not only conflict, of course, but even the appearance of it. If an objective person might say that doesn't look right, my experience has been that appellates and Supreme Court, even trial court judges, move off of the case. There's another judge who can take the case. There's no reason to put at risk the public's trust and confidence in a decision by staying on a case where someone close to you has received a gift or money or something from a party or someone related to the party. But we do have the Commission on Judicial Performance. It's a constitutional body. It's made up primarily of non-lawyers and non-judges appointed by the legislature. And the Chief Justice would make an appointment. But these are people who are not lawyers who judge and make a decision whenever a complaint is filed against a jurist for any of the code violations. And if you read, the Commission on Judicial Performance is active. They remove judges, they sanction judges, and no other state in the union has a Commission on Judicial Performance like California's.
It's very, very interesting. Yes, I think I have learned in my life to listen to that little voice. If you think you're even remotely close to that line, stay away. And you'll never go wrong if you just stay away from that line. So, well, I want to thank you very much, Chief Justice, for being with us today. Really appreciate your time. And I want to thank our attendees for being with us today. We'll be back next month with another Maddy Associates speaker series. Have a great day, everyone. So, Chief Justice, what we're going to do now is